The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday, May 7th. Hope everybody's having a fantastic week. And ready for a bunch of Yaron Brook shows, 2 p.m. every day for the rest of the week, 2 to 3 hour shows, every one of them. And thank you, Catherine and John, for the support right off the bat with $20 stickers. Really, really appreciate it. That gets us off to a great start. All right, today we're going to spend the first hour on news and, of course, answering your questions. We'll see how long that takes, depending on how many questions we have and the extent of those questions. And then the second hour, or the following those questions, we will take up the sensitive, tricky issue of transgender, particularly specifically with regard to children. And the treatment they get, and this is in the context of a report issued by a physician called, the report is called the Cass Review. Her name is Hilary Cass, and she was commissioned by the British NHS, National Health Service, to review the policies, what the NHS was doing with children, the whole phenomena of children transitioning, and she issued a report, and we're going to be talking about that report and about the responses to it, and the phenomena, which is not easy. All right, so that is the of course that is the program. Of course, what exactly we talk about and how much we talk about it is to a large extent dependent on you. Because you get to ask questions using the Super Chat. You get to ask questions that guide the show and take the show where you want. So please feel free to use the Super Chat for that purpose. If you're watching live. If you're not watching live and you'd like to ask me a question, then you can send it to me by PayPal, or you can send it to me by PayPal, or send me an email and put some money into PayPal. So there's a variety of ways in which you can get questions to me that I will try to answer on the show. I do know, just housekeeping, I do know that I owe you guys like a gazillion reviews of movies and music, songs, and a painting, one painting. And I'm gonna catch up. It probably, this coming weekend, I will take a chunk of time and listen to all those songs, listen to a bunch of them, and I still got two movies to watch, and I've got something Shazbot has me from Andor. I'll try to get through as much of that as possible this coming weekend, and then start sprinkling in the reviews into the daily shows that we have. So I have not forgotten. It's just been a little crazy. It's going to continue to be crazy because I've got one more Jordan Peterson Academy course that I have to prepare and deliver. This one on finance, 8 hours. I have to put together an 8-hour course on finance, which I will do in the next 3 weeks. All right, that is housekeeping, at least for now. Let us jump in. We'll start with an update from, as we do almost every show, because it's the top of the news, and it seems to be of vast interest to people, with an update from Gaza in terms of the Israel-Gaza war and what is going on there. The main, I'd say the news, kind of everything happened pretty dramatically yesterday, right after the show. But I think we talked about yesterday, Israel seemed to be committed to going into Rafah, or at least going into parts of Rafah. And that's indeed what happened yesterday. If it's just a sequence of events, over the weekend, there was the sense that there was going to be some agreement about a ceasefire, and that Israel had agreed, and Hamas had agreed, but then it became clear that there was actually no agreement, and in the midst of this, the Hamas fighters launched a barrage of I think, mortars into a concentration of Israeli soldiers on the Israeli side of the border, next to the place where aid crosses over from Israel into the south of Israel, and as a consequence, what we got was, you know, I think this accelerated Israel's commitment to going into Rafah and stopping all this. I've talked about this. They should have gone into Rafah a long, long time ago, probably at the very beginning of the war. And at the same time, Hamas came out yesterday morning and said, oh, no, we've agreed to the ceasefire terms. But Hamas had agreed to their own fictitious ceasefire terms. They had not agreed to anything Israel had proposed. They had not agreed to anything Israel had agreed to with the Egyptians and Qatari negotiators. Hamas had agreed to something that was irrelevant. Israel looked at that and said, you're just playing political games, and that's what they were doing. They were trying to get headlines, and they succeeded in the world, saying Hamas agrees, Israel doesn't, to make Israel look like the bad guys. Israel are the bad guys for even negotiating terms, but put that aside. Israel said, no, we're not going to play this game. And they did they said, we're half not going to play this game, half, right? So on the one hand, they entered into Rafah, we'll get to that in a minute, and on the other hand, they sent negotiators to Egypt to continue negotiating with Hamas about the terms, which Hamas keeps rejecting, and the ones they propose, which are completely unacceptable to Israel itself. Anyway, where this ends is impossible to say. Israel seems to be willing to do anything, compromise almost about anything in order to get a deal. But Hamas keeps playing with them. Hamas knows how to play these PR games, knows how to play these games that involve the Biden administration. The Biden administration has basically become parties to the games that Hamas is playing. So Israel decided to enter Gaza, to enter Rafah, Rafiah, or the southernmost part of Gaza, and where there is a entry point into Egypt. This is where aid trucks are coming in from Egypt. This is where people who leave in Gaza, who've got Egyptian permission to do so, can enter into Egypt. Biden tried to convince them not to. I think we talked about this yesterday. Europeans tried to convince Israel not to, but they decided to go in. But this is the point. They decided to go in a very, very limited way. They captured, they went in and they captured the checkpoint into Egypt. They took down the Hamas flag. They raised an Israeli flag over it, which was very symbolic, and a lot of people got excited about. Me less so. And they were operating in some areas in the most eastern part, the closest part to the Israeli border of Rafah. About 150,000 Palestinians have already evacuated that area and gone north and fled to a little further north, where Israel has set up tents, northwest, so close to the beach, set up tents. And providing them with water and food and everything else. So, again, talk about altruism and talk about granting your enemy all this stuff. So what you have here is a situation where, and you can blame the U.S. for all of this, but I don't. I mean, this is all Israel's fault. Israel could have entered Gaza quickly, could have operated faster, could have gone through Rafiah in the beginning. Rafah in the beginning could have strategically played this game completely differently. It has given every single opportunity for the Americans to slow Israel down. The Americans always do this. It doesn't matter if it's Republicans or Democrats or who knows what in the administration. The job of the Americans is always to slow down American progress, Israeli progress, slow down, prevent Israel from actually winning. That's been the MO, modus operandi, going back to Nixon and Kissinger in '73, and certainly Bush Jr. in 2003, 4, 5, it's constant. All the U.S. does, its job in these things, is prevent Israel from winning and slow everything down. And this has nothing to do with Biden. This has nothing to do with, it's just, this is American foreign policy. This is the level and state of the pathetic nature of American foreign policy that both parties play completely into and have accepted, basically have accepted totally. So Israel went in. It captured this area. It took no casualties, which is good. It's patting itself on the back. Everybody seems mildly happy and full of themselves. But now what? Does Israel continue into Rafah? Well, the Americans have basically told them, if you continue to Rafah, we're going to stop providing you with military aid. We're going to stop providing you with missiles and ammunition. The Israeli public doesn't want Israel to continue into, or segments of it, into the rest of Rafah because they have prioritized hostage release over victory. So they want more negotiations, and they want more compromise, and they want more deals. But it is now, we've got a new stalemate where Israel is occupying the Rafah, the entry into Egypt on what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is the corridor between the Mediterranean and the Israeli border that runs along the border with Egypt. It's called the Philadelphia corridor. Israel, it will probably at some point try to control the entire corridor. For right now, they're only controlling the most eastern part of it. Anyway, this is far from over. This will be something we'll keep updating you. Compromise constantly, and nothing dramatic is happening. Israel is not serious, and the Americans are holding them back. And on top of that, you've got the Israeli public itself, which is shifted, as I've said, to a much more orientation about getting the hostages back and negotiating and compromising for that as a higher priority than victory. And this is, of course, the danger from the beginning of this kind of slow methodological approach that catered to every concern the global community has. So this is again, this is kind of this is typical. This is the consequence of Israel not doing the job right from the beginning, right from day one, the job they needed to do in Gaza, and getting this over with quickly. As I said at the time, the longer it took, the worse the outcome. All right, this is a question. I'll take it because it's on the topic. Mike says, I hear that Biden wants to bring Gazans to the U.S. Is it even realistic to think that living here will smooth the rough edges of these fanatics? Well, I mean, it really depends on who you bring in. I mean, some of them are clearly fanatics and nothing would help, and they're nuts, and they're the ones heavily involved in Hamas and so on. And it's very, very unlikely that they are the ones that Biden is talking about bringing here. But there are families in Gaza, and let's be real here, there are families in Gaza that maybe have family in the United States that might not be as crazy and fanatical, and where small numbers could be brought to the U.S. Now, why we would want to do that, put that question aside for a minute, is it doable to bring the relatively peace-loving, the ones that are relatively peace-loving to the United States? Sure, I don't think you can assume 100% of Gazans are monsters. That's simply not true that they are. And a lot of them would love to get out of there. Would love to get out of there. They don't want to be there. 100,000 Gazans have already left for Egypt. And from Egypt, I'm sure they've gone to Europe and the US and a lot of other places, depending on the kind of citizenship and the kind of visas they might have. A lot of Gazans had dual citizenship. They had American citizenship as well as Palestinian or whatever citizenship they have in Gaza. A lot of them had probably Egyptian citizenship or citizenship from another country in the Middle East. So there are a lot of different options. Biden here is virtue signaling towards his left, saying, yeah, we're going to take care of those really, sad refugees in a crisis. And yes, we know that they have American relatives in Detroit, and we're going to help them reunite with their relatives and bring them to the United States. And this is another just ploy to, shore up his support among the Arab community in Michigan. And of course, Michigan is has significant Arab population. It could be the difference between a Democrat and a Republican voting. In terms of screening people and making sure they're not fanatics, you can use the facial recognition software that the Israelis have that has a database of, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in Gaza and their particular violent affiliation. So Israel's pretty good at being able to identify who is and who's not. Again, I'm sure they make mistakes. You can also say, we'll only bring in to the United States people over 60. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which you can do this. I'm not suggesting Biden administration would do that, but the suggestion that Biden administration would allow a bunch of Hamas members to come into the United States is just ludicrous. It's good fodder if you're a partisan and you want to make Biden look ridiculous. It's not hard to make Biden look ridiculous. He does it himself pretty much every day. But it's just not real any more than it was real that, when Trump brought people from Iraq or when Trump brought people from Afghanistan, there wasn't any kind of screening. Of course there was. Now the screening is not perfect. And of course, what really is the problem is the radicalization even Muslim kids get at our universities. The real problem in America is not Muslims in America. It's professors in America, some Muslims, many, most not, some of them are Jewish, who teach radical left, nutty, crazy, far left ideology that is anti-American and has led to the kind of demonstrations and the kind of insanity that we saw on campuses. But most of those kids on the campuses, overwhelming majority of those kids on the campuses are not Middle Eastern. They're not even Muslim. Most of those kids are nice kids from good families, good, I put in quotes, who knows. But basically they're of European ancestry, let's call it that way. And many of them Black Americans, quite a few Black Americans. They're the radical left, they're the far left. Whoever belongs to far left tends to be there. Also disproportionately female, although, that's true today on American campuses, period. That is, American campuses today, period, are majority female. So I'm not sure one can read too much into that. Right. All right, let's see. So that's what's going on in Gaza. I don't think there's... thank you, Mike, for the question. Appreciate it. I don't think there's much beyond that. I expect a few days of calm, a few days of more negotiations, Israel humming and hawing, threatening to go into Rafah, but not doing anything. The Biden administration threatening Israel not to go into Rafah. Israel saying, we won't listen to the Americans, we won't listen to the Europeans, but then again, listening to them. Netanyahu saying, we'll do what we think is right, but then not doing what he thinks is right. Anyway, that's the game being played. Most of this game has to do with internal Israeli and internal American politics. It has less to do with any kind of real self-interest, right? Any kind of real self-interest. All right. Just to finish off the thought on the campus demonstrations, just one more data point on the insanity of all this and the complete capitulation of administrations to these students. Columbia basically canceled its main commencement event. because it was worried about demonstrations and disruptions that occurred on other campuses. In a statement, they wrote, quote, "These past few weeks have been incredibly difficult for our community. So in order to heal, we're going to give in to the demonstrators even some more," right? Wouldn't a commencement event help heal the Colombian and maybe ban the people who participated in the tent city and in the taking over of the building? I think they've been kicked off campus anyway. Wouldn't it be a healing for all the other students to have some semblance of regularity after their classes were put online and no in-person exams, and now no commencement? I mean, remember, and it's really important to remember because it's very easy to forget this fact. An overwhelming majority of students at these universities were not camping out. The vast majority of students at these universities are not pro-Hamas. This is still a minority. It's still a small minority, even in the worst offending universities like Columbia. It is the administration that is weak. It is the faculty that is scary. But in terms of the students, again, a majority of the students are not crazy leftists. But on the flip side of that, if we project into the future, how many of the people who go to Columbia who are going to become future professors, future intellectuals, future radicals on campus participated in these, not radicals, future professors participated in these demonstrations? That's the scary part. To the extent that these people are going to go on to get graduate degrees and become intellectuals in our culture, that's scary. That's scary. And this is, of course, if you remember, we talked about this. What happened to 1968 demonstrators in Columbia? They went out and got PhDs. They became the professors at Columbia, and they raised the current generation of, basically nutcases, right? They raised this generation of insanity. And what is this generation going to do? How crazy are you going to get? I mean, this is much worse, much more nihilistic, much more anti-American, much more, just insane to be pro-Hamas than anything the 60s generation had. So where do you go from here? I don't know that there's any way further you can go once you reached the depths of nihilistic hell. Anyway, Columbia administration continuing its complete failure to stand up to this, and complete willingness to kind of give in to the nihilists completely. All right, this is just a quick story. Ukraine says it's foiled a Russian plot to kill Zelensky. Now, this is just a story coming out of Ukraine, coming out of their intelligence services. Take it for what it's worth. Hard to cross-corroborate things that are basically specified that are secret. But it sounds reasonable. I mean, this is not insane, right? It talks about a Russian plot to assassinate both Zelensky and top military and political figures. The security services in Ukraine arrested 2 Ukrainian colonels that were accused of participating in the plot, and both have been arrested on suspicion of treason. The Ukrainian Secret Service is claiming that this is the work of the Russian FSB, which is of course, the inheritor of the old KGB, and that these agents, including these 2 Ukrainian colonels, were working at Russian direction, and really tasked with identifying people close to Zelensky, security detail, and potentially take him hostage and kill him, and also trying to kill the head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency, as well as other top military figures within Ukraine. So this breaking news today, but again, hard to tell exactly, exactly what is going on here, and hard to tell exactly, the extent to which this is all true, and this is not part of some game the Russians and Ukrainians are playing with one another. All right, let's see. I think you'd all be glad, particularly if you live in Florida. You'll all be glad, particularly if you live in Florida, because Governor DeSantis yesterday, not yesterday, but last week, signed the bill that we talked about earlier, banning lab-grown meat. So the bill is finally being signed. You can all sigh of relief. You will not be eating any lab-grown meat in Florida, and you will not be engaged in the companies that engaged in developing lab-grown meat will not be headquartered in Florida. So I think DeSantis, as usual, has just saved Western civilization. Good for him. I'm sure Scott is going to come up with some good reason why DeSantis can do no wrong, and this is a good thing. Why lab-grown meat? Who knows? It could be a dairy farmer, cattle farmers lobbying, although I don't know that there are that many cattle farmers in Florida. It could be legitimate health concerns. I'll call BS on that one. It's not, and lab-grown meat is not available to people anyway right now. This is something that is still in development, still in research. Is still being studied. I think some of the leaders in this are companies associated with my alma mater at the Technion in Israel, but there's a number of companies in Silicon Valley working on this, and it's still in process. I hope they succeed. I mean, it would be great if I could order my meat exactly with how much fat I like it, the exact spec, the exact animal, press a button, and my microwave actually makes the meat in front of me like it does in Star Trek. Of course, Scott is defending Florida. As you'd expect, the mindless Trump syndrome, or mindless DeSantis syndrome in this case, to do. Yes, Democrats oppose lab-grown meat, but that is expected, right? The environmentalist left, is massively anti-lab-grown meat because they hate GMO, they hate human manipulation of the environment, they hate anything to do with science and with actually improving the human condition and moving us forward. So you would expect parts of the left, that traditional environmentalist groups, to be opposed to it. On the other hand, there are parts of the left that are very supportive of the lab-grown meat, and those are the parts that claim that climate change is an issue, and therefore we need to get rid of cows. We should slaughter all the cows that exist because they produce methane through their farting and their waste, and therefore we should go to all full-on lab-grown meat. And then there's rational people, which obviously Scott would not be part of, but there's the group of rational people, and that group would say, let's see what these scientists produce. Let's see what it tastes like. Let's see what it looks like. If we can actually produce lab-grown meat that's cheaper, easier to produce, and tastier, hell yeah. Sounds amazing. Amazing, right? And indeed, but that requires reason, rationality, and an actual respect for science, which I don't think DeSantis or any of the Republicans right now are in a position to exhibit. This is a political party that abandoned science a long time ago when they embraced fully creationism. But this is a political party that doesn't really believe in science, and this is a political party that will now take positions against anything that what they view as the crazy left take. So if the crazy leftists for lab-grown meat for climate change reasons, we're against it. We're going to ban it. We're going to stop it. We don't want it. But that is the level of political discourse in America today. That is the level, in my view, of the kind of nuttiness of politics today. Gone are principles. Gone is the notion of freedom, liberty. Gone is the notion of individual choice. Now God is the notion of, okay, we have some guiding principles. The only people who have principles, in quotes I put this, are the far left, who are completely nutty and crazy. And then the entire right is just responding to the left. It has nothing to stand for. It's not pro anything, except going back to 1220. It has nothing to stand for. It's only responsive to what the left is pro-Ukraine. Okay, so we have to be pro-Russia. Russia's pro-1220, so we have to be pro-Russia. The left is pro lab-grown meat, then we have to be against it. I don't see any other rationale that red states are suddenly banning lab-grown meat other than that, and it fits the MO. And if it fits the MO, go for it. Go for it. That I think is the reality. All right. Let's see. What do we want to go for? All right. Let's do Putin, and then we'll do DEI. Okay. So Putin was inaugurated for a 5th term, which basically marks 25 years of Russia being in his, grip of power. 25 years that have not been particularly good for Russia. The economy in Russia has stalled well before the war in Ukraine. Quality of life, standard of living has basically been stagnant. If you look at every measure of well-being in Russia, it's abysmal, particularly as compared to countries in, countries in other countries in the old Soviet bloc, but particularly taking into account the fact that Russia has these vast, unbelievable resources, natural resources. Russia is a poor country. It's a poor country on the level of individuals, and it is as a consequence. And this is Putin's legacy. But Putin is not about the economy, just like the modern new right in America is not about the economy. They couldn't care less about economic progress. They couldn't care less about economic liberty or economic freedom. Putin, like the new right in the United States, is all about tradition. It's all about family. It's all about authoritarianism. It's all about militarism. And with Russia, not like the new right in the United States, it's all about a kind of a resurrection of empire, and kind of the territorial claims of empire. And this has been his legacy for the next 25 years, going back to his comments about the tragedy of the breakup of the Soviet Union, all the way to his invasion of Georgia and his two invasions of Ukraine. Putin has embraced this legacy of traditionalism and imperialism as his hallmark, trying to resurrect and recreate a mythology around the greatness of Russia and the greatness of the Russian people and the greatness of a Russian legacy. What is happening right now, and I think because of the war in Ukraine and Russia's isolation and the ease at which it's become very easy to frame the West as the enemy, more than ever, Putin's kind of long-term strategy is becoming very, very, very clear and becoming much more explicit than it used to be. A strategy that I think is only materialized even in his own mind, probably over the last 10 years. Putin seems to have been quite different before 2013, but has changed since then. So what is this agenda for Russia moving forward? First of all, it's an agenda focused on war. That is, the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon. The war in Ukraine, even if Ukraine, quote, wins and pushes the Russians back, Russia's not going to give up on that. Russia can't win in terms of it's unlikely it would take over all of Ukraine. What you could get is a continued militarization and continued war. And of course, Russia has expressed quite clearly, maybe not Putin explicitly, although he does implicitly, that Ukraine is just the beginning. It is not the end. It is not what they ultimately want. They want a lot more than that. So the first feature of a Russia under Putin in the future is continued militarization. What else? Really, the forging of an ultra-conservative, patriarchal society that's mobilized against liberal freedoms, hostile to the things that, you know, most ultra-conservatives, most traditionalists despise. That is, it's going to be it's going to be even more than it has been in the past, anti-gay, anti-anything that they view as Western decadence. And it is going to be oriented towards promoting the family and promoting social welfare spending to enhance Orthodox Christian values. This means reshaping education to really indoctrinate. Remember, this is state-run education without exception. Indoctrinate a new generation of kind of patriotic youth because they're going to be fighting. This is going to be a war. You know, you're going to have military lessons, and you know, they're going to be taught to use weapon systems, primarily just Kalashnikovs and assault rifles from very early on in high school. This is going to be an attempt in Russian society to militarize this society, both psychologically, you know, culturally, you know, but in a sense of the educational establishment, but also in a sense in the way they raise their young men to be fighters, right? Anybody who's liberal, anti-war, whether it's performers, directors, writers, artists, or whoever, is going to be blacklisted, marginalized, put to the side, sometimes arrested, put in jail. But clearly, opposing the regime is going to become even more criminal than it is today. The pro-war faction is going to be enhanced, and you know, not the pro-war faction that criticizes Putin. Those people are finding themselves in jail. We're talking about the pro-war faction that is willing to dedicate themselves fully and completely to Putin and his vision for Russia. You know, they're going to roll back women's rights. They're going to, you know, they're going to emphasize the role of women in the kitchen. They're going to do what Matt Walsh and people at the you know, Daily Wire would love to do, which is devote their educational resources to making sure that women get back into the kitchen and more importantly, get back to having children, because Russia has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. It has one of the fastest shrinking populations in the world. They'll curb abortion. They'll curb any kind of activity and activism by feminists or by women trying to assert their independence. They've already started to rewrite the history so that they celebrate Stalin. You know, this is going to be, Stalin will become, Putin is already, and will become, in terms of the educational establishment, Putin's hero. And of course, you know, anybody attacking Putin, attacking the war, that will be criminalized, and the West will be painted in the worst possible colors and will be deemed evil and the enemy, and you know, prepping Russian civilization and the Russian people for prolonged war not with Ukraine, but ultimately Ukraine as the Russians see it as just the beginning of a prolonged war against the West and against its values and against it. I think it will be tomorrow. We'll be doing a segment. I'll be doing a segment on what's his name, Alexander Dugin. Alexander Dugin did a 20-minute short interview with Tucker Carlson. So we'll be watching that video together and looking at it. It was a video in which, at least in the beginning of it, but really in almost all of it, Dugin was surprisingly coherent, because Dugin can be, talk in very obtuse language, surprisingly clear and coherent without any about anything, so we will talk about Dugin. It was very, very clear about his position, very, very clear about his stance on things and what really drives him and what really motivates him. So in that sense, it was one of the best interviews with him, because we can see exactly what this guy believes. This is supposedly, people have called him Putin's brain, although it's not clear how much influence he has directly on Putin. They certainly do seem to share a philosophical approach. All right, that's what I wanted to say about Russia. All right, DEI, do a segment on DEI, and then we've got some science stuff, which is a few things that seem to be kind of fun. All right, let's see. Silvano has a Russia question, so let me take this. If Russia goes full authoritarian, how likely is it another flood of people trying to leave will succeed? Is it too late for free thinkers to leave Russia? No, I mean, it's still possible to leave Russia. It might be harder if you're young and military age to leave. I think most of the people who wanted to leave in those ages have already left. But maybe as people graduate from high school, it'll be more and more difficult for them to leave. I think that it's still possible to leave Russia. There's still fairly easy to get into Georgia, although as Georgia becomes under Russian influence, as we talked about yesterday, it's going to be more difficult once you get to Georgia to feel like you're out of Russia. But people can still go through Kazakhstan and still go other places. The real challenge for people is not leaving Russia. The real challenge for people is getting a visa, getting a work permit to go elsewhere. I mean, again, this is the great tragedy of American foreign policy and American immigration policy. Imagine if at the breakout of the war with Ukraine, America said, hey, any Russians out there who want to immigrate to the United States, we got visas. We got visas. I mean, there's so much talent in Russia, engineering talent, computer science talent, hacking talent. The Russian hackers seem to be pretty good. And most of them just can't get to the United States, can't get out. They go to Georgia, they go to Kazakhstan, they go to some of these other places, and they work remotely, but there's only so far they can get professionally by working remotely. Imagine if you encouraged all the Russian entrepreneurs and all the Russian engineers and all the Russian programmers to move to the United States. What a boon to the U.S. economy. What a waste that we have these crazy, stupid, uninformed immigration laws that make that difficult. Should have done the same thing in Hong Kong. Should be doing, constantly be doing that, constantly, with regard to China. And of course, if we had rational immigration laws, you wouldn't have to do it on a case-by-case basis. You could just open up the U.S. economy for anybody who wanted to come and work here and had the capacity and had the job available to them. So, yeah. And I see people are still arguing about, lab-grown tech. Isn't it truly stunning how people on the right have become so anti-science and so fearful of science and so fearful of health now? I mean, one of the things that was stunning with the COVID vaccine was oh, the people on the right were saying, oh, the FDA didn't do enough testing. I thought we were the people who said we didn't need an FDA. That's my approach, right? We don't need an FDA. We can manage without an FDA. Let these drug companies produce drugs. Let markets adjust. Who needs an FDA? And now, lab-grown meat. Oh my God, they might use mRNA, the same mRNA that is not being used to cure cancer. I'm sure these people are going to say, when there's a cure for cancer that uses mRNA, they're going to say, no, I can't take that. That might kill me. That might do something to my DNA. I can't do that. It's just, God. I mean, maybe this country was always filled with the kind of ignorance and the kind of anti-science mentality that is coming to the forefront over the last few years. But I always expected it from the left because of their because of the environmentalism and humans playing God, and their anti-GMO. But it seemed like for a while that the right would stand up to that. But philosophy matters. This is Ayn Rand's point, right? If you don't have rational principles, you cannot sustain even your better views. And the fact that the right never had rational principles, something Ayn Rand identified in her critique of the conservative movement in the late 1960s, early 70s, really back to the Goldwater campaign and her critique of it. And following that, they didn't have rational principles. Then it was just a matter of time when they became completely irrational, completely nutty as the left. And that is what has become of the right today. And what's sad is that there are people who think of themselves in somehow connected to Ayn Rand and related to Ayn Rand who are now buying in to this anti-reason, anti-rationality, anti-science, anti-markets, mentality, and a fear-mongering, not because there's anything to fear, but because it's their tribal duty, their tribal responsibility, and tribal responsibility to do so, and in doing so, exhibiting an unbelievable ignorance, among other things, of science, never mind everything else. All right, DEI. So over the weekend, good news on the DEI front. I know, again, some of you won't accept it, and you'll claim I'm making this up or whatever. But good news on the DEI front. Wait a minute, what happened to my news story? Has disappeared. There it is. All right. Good news was that, yes, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT announced that it would no longer require prospective faculty members to submit diversity statements. So you remember we talked about this a few months ago, maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I can't remember, that faculty all over the United States, not just at MIT, but to get a faculty job, you basically had to write this brief memo, basically swearing allegiance to some, diversity, inclusion, equity standard. That is, hiring at our top universities, the best universities sometimes in the world, was not anymore based on ability, publication, scientific qualifications, but now it was all of that plus you had to write a DEI statement. You had to commit, you had to swear that you were okay with this DEI agenda. Real horror, really horrific, really authoritarian, and of course, this is a way to force people. This is a way to impose on people. A dogma the universities accepted, and that basically everybody went along with. And if you stood up against and you weren't tenure, you found it very, very difficult to get a job. There were some exceptions, like University of Chicago, which is an exception on a lot of these things, and good for them. Anyway, MIT announced that it no longer required prospective faculty to submit such proposals, and this is great. It's scrapped. It just shows how nutty things got, how insane the social justice movement became and it managed to win. But it is, without any question, in retreat. And suffering real setbacks. MIT was one of the more woke schools, in spite of its focus on engineering and science. The humanities at MIT were particularly bad. MIT, of course, is one of the places where the president of the university couldn't condemn calls for violence against Jews, and yet she's the only one who kept her job. The Harvard president and the Penn president all resigned. She kept her job suddenly, and maybe part of the deal of her keeping her job was taking actions to mitigate some of the crazy, nutty, so-called social justice stuff that MIT had embraced. So DEI statements, DEI diversity statements, no longer needed at MIT. You can now apply for a job freely without it. Now, this is part of what is being observed as a pattern, and that is a pattern of a DEI retreat across the corporate landscape, and even, as you see with MIT, within the university system. So, for example, I'll give you one example. Last year, Eli Lilly annual shareholders letter referred to DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion in words, either one, 48 times. Shareholder letter 48 times. This year, there's no DEI, there's no diversity, equity, and inclusion in the letter. Starbucks got shareholder approval to replace representation goals with talent, performance, and executive bonus incentives. What the hell? That's insane. I mean, managers at Starbucks are now going to be evaluated and provided bonuses based on performance and talent, not based on representation goals. At Coors, people and plant metrics have displayed environmental, social, and governance, ESG goals, and the acronym DEI has completely disappeared. Maybe they learned from the Bud White fiasco. So American business is basically backing off. A lot of this has to do with the Supreme Court ruling in the Harvard case saying that discriminating against a group, i.e. Asians, in Asians at Harvard, so in the Supreme Court case against Harvard, where they struck down affirmative action in colleges and universities, since then, firms have withdrawn from DEI. And at the University of Texas, they fired the entire DEI program. And again, you could say that's a red state, but they had DEI for a long time. But since this ruling, they've fired the whole DEI administration. Corporations have moved away from it. Some of it is just a change in language. But some of it is real. Some of it is actually real. Change of the way corporations evaluate people, less about DEI, more about performance, more about actual performance. I'll give you one more example. Demand for programs such as, quote, unconscious bias training. You remember unconscious bias training, which was big with BLM and exploded. Whoever was offering unconscious bias training made a boatload of money right after BLM. That just exploded. It's been super high. Anyway, demand for programs such as unconscious bias training, high a few years ago, has dried up. Now there's a spike in training around, I don't know, employee resource groups and helping out people, groups of caregivers, veterans, first-generation Americans, talking about, real challenges and real struggles that people actually have, instead of delving into unconscious bias, which was always questionable, although it probably exists, unconscious bias probably exists, but these programs were not targeted at actually eradicating it. They were targeted around you feeling guilty about it and acknowledging you have it and acknowledging you can't get rid of it, which is basically, what they held and what they believed, right? All right, almost at an hour. All right, let's do this one science, quick science story, and then I'll go to the super chats, and then we'll move on to the not so controversial topics of transgender children and what to do about them, right? What is it? Gender something, gender. Anyway, let's see. Yes, doctors have trained an artificial intelligence system to basically track patients, in a hospital. So basically, to track their vital signs and gender, and to track their vital signs and to identify who is at risk. Not when it goes, in one of those machines at the hospital, freaks out and they're already having an event, but before the event, right? So, how do we know in advance? How do we integrate all the information provided by the various monitors hooked up to people in a hospital? How do we integrate all that and see patterns in all that so as to indicate who is at risk? I mean, this is a big statistical correlation, if you will, algorithm that basically shows what is relevant and what is not on a large sample, and then draws conclusions for that are then actionable. They trained this AI, or they did a randomized clinical trial with almost 16,000 patients at 2 hospitals. And the AI actually reduced overall deaths among high-risk patients by 31%. Now, this is massive. It's really, really rare for any medical treatment to reduce the risk of mortality by 31%. And this is with no drugs. This is just by letting doctors know, hey, this person is at high risk. Do something. Do something before the risk manifests itself in a problem. Do something now. Check him out. Figure out what's going on and address it. So this is just through monitoring. This is just through AI saying, we can see something that your old monitoring systems don't see, using the same data, don't see. Anyway, this is actually a research that was started at the National Defense Medical Center in Taiwan, where they trained the AI on 450,000 electrocardiograms, the ECG tests, which measure the heart's electricity activity, and then gave them the outcomes. So they showed them a bunch of ECG. They basically fed that into a machine, a bunch of ECGs and other parameters that accumulated by a hospital at a particular given point in time. They also fed it the outcomes, what happened. The AI, in a sense, saw the patterns that elude a human being just looking at it, because we can't integrate that quantity of data all at once. The AI is a machine that makes us more intelligent, because it gives us that data. We give it the parameters. It tells, yeah, here's the pattern. It can see, you can see then the pattern, and then it alerts the doctors. So in these 16,000, again, 31% reduction in mortality. We are on, I really do think, yesterday we talked about the mRNA vaccines for cancer. This technology, periodically, we talk about other stuff. I attended a seminar yesterday about life extension given by a couple of experts. And the bottom line is that I really do think we're on the cusp of some major breakthroughs on the cusp of real changes to our ability to live longer, primarily by just eliminating, diseases. If we can cure cancer, if we can have vaccines against cancer, and treat cancer on an individualized basis and eliminate that as a risk factor for dying, that is, yes, you're still going to get cancer, but now we can figure out what the cancer's nature is, design a vaccine for you around it, inject you with it, it goes out, basically the body then kills the cancer for you. If we can do that, then you eliminate mortality from at least significant amount of cancer. If we can catch heart disease early and other things early because of AI, if we can develop medications that eliminate this, then life extension will increase dramatically just by eliminating diseases. And then, by curing diseases, and then if we can add on top of that a real understanding of how to reverse aging, of how to actually extend life, which I think, again, we're getting close to. Then I think that means we're actually, life is going to change dramatically. It's going to change dramatically on this planet. Now, people are going to live a lot longer. They're going to live not just a lot longer, but they're going to live healthier lives. And whatever challenges they face, they will be able to deal with them because the science is going to take us there, assuming we let the science take us there, And it's not obvious to me that we're going to, right? There is real opposition to life extension, both from the left and the right. I mean, the first people to write against life extension were from the right, Leon Kass, for the Bush administration in 2002 or 3, I think it was, in his biotech commission. But the left hates it as well. It's, again, playing God for both left and right. The scientific community is going to have to overcome political objections to this. But hopefully, if we can, the science is amazing. Our level of knowledge is amazing. And given AI, which now allows us to integrate and to observe patterns where we have quantities of data that we've never seen before, we've never seen so much data. I mean, it's just, the upside here is just hard to fathom. Well, it means, again, living longer and living better, living healthier, which is super exciting. I hope my generation gets to benefit from that. But I'm pretty convinced that if civilization survives, and if you guys, or some of you guys at least, don't kill it completely, then those of you who are under the age of 40, and certainly those of you under the age of 30, are going to see a real revolution within your lifetime, and are going to see a real shift and a real change and a real dramatic increase in the quality of your health and your longevity. So that is, I think, super exciting. Something to really look forward to. All right, that is the news segment of this show. I will now shift, just to give people markers for the new format, shift to doing some Super Chat. We'll do a bunch of Super Chat. I'll try to finish whatever Super Chat you throw at me for as long as that takes. And then we will shift to talking about gender dysphoria among children and young people, and what should be done about it. In particular, talk about this report that was issued by an independent commission appointed by the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, that issued the report earlier in April, written by, God, I now forget her first name, but her last name is Cass. What did I do here? I am looking for something. There it is. Hillary Cass. I'm pretty sure it's Hillary. But we'll find out. Where's the name? Hillary Cass, Dr. Hillary Cass. All right, so we'll do that after I answer the questions. And so, yes, this is a good time just to quickly break and say that this show is sponsored by the Ayn Rand Institute. You should all consider attending OCON. OCON's a fabulous place to meet a lot of people in person. Some of them you won't like. Some of that is represented here in the chat. But most of them I think you will really enjoy and really like. You will make a lot of new friends. You will meet maybe your future spouse. A lot of marriages come out of OCON. And you'll just have a lot of fun interacting with people who basically share your values, or for the most part, share your values. And on top of that, you will also have an opportunity to listen to some of the best speakers in objectivism, some of the most interesting talks that you will hear, and you will get to interact with those speakers, again, in conversation in the hallways, over meals, and just, going... at the conference. It's a very socially open and casual, and the speakers are very, very friendly. So I encourage you all to think about coming. If you do want to come, it's just in 2 months from now, so a month and a half really. There is a discount code for those of you who listen to Yaron Brook Show, and that is 24YBS10. So when you register, you can use this discount code, 24YBS10, which will give you a 10% discount code. Or if you pay full price, you can attend the gala for free. I'm not sure how much the gala is costing people to attend, but in this case, you can attend the gala for free. And the gala this year is going to be dedicated to honoring Harry Binswanger for his really lifetime of work at the Ayn Rand Institute and what he's done for the Ayn Rand Institute, serving on the board. He will be retiring from the board this summer. So that's going to be a fun event. Don't miss that. It'll be really, really cool and really, really fun. Let's see. And of course, the second sponsor of the Yaron Brook Show is Alex Epstein. Alex Epstein is, of course, the writer of Energy Talking Points. You can find his work at alexepstein.substack.com. He also is the mind behind Alex AI, that is the AI that trained on Alex's writing on energy, climate change, and fossil fuels. You can ask it a question, get an answer as if Alex was answering you, and you can get access to that, something a lot of politicians and a lot of CEOs have access to, by becoming a subscriber to a service that Alex provides. So please go to alexepstein.substack.com and sign up for the newsletter. If you don't know who Alex is, check him out, and check out the interviews. I've done many interviews on the Yaron Brook Show with Alex. You can just search Yaron Brook, Alex Epstein, and you'll see it. I also highly recommend, if you haven't read Fossil Future, that is one of those must-read books that everybody out there who cares about the future, who cares about the present, should read. All right, let's jump into the super chat here, and let's see. Did we have some stickers? Yeah, Zach T, thank you. And who else did a sticker? I know there were. I recognized a couple early on. All right, that's all I have access to. But thank you to all the people who did stickers. You too can do a sticker to support the show. For any amount, $2, $1, $1.99, $20, $100, $500. I don't think you can do more than $500, but $500 certainly works. All right, Liam, thank you, $100. Wow. ARI just released a video comparing Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman's approach. It seems Ayn Rand's more fundamental philosophy is what is needed. But I've talked to a few free marketers who have said Milton Friedman was more influential on them than Rand. Are they corrupt? No, I don't think they're necessarily corrupt. I wouldn't call them corrupt. I would say that they are non-philosophical, that they're less interested in the philosophy, that they're less interested in maybe even giving up on their existing philosophy. Maybe they're religious, maybe they're utilitarian. And while they've read Ayn Rand, they get that she has an alternative philosophy. They don't agree with it. They don't like it. Now, maybe they don't agree with it and don't like it because they're evading, and that would be corruption. Or maybe they just disagree and are wrong, right? I think they're wrong because I think she's right. But not every time you disagree with somebody, they are corrupt. So, people come to free markets from a number of different perspectives. A lot of people come to free markets, yet they don't want to give up on their initial ideology, even though I believe, certainly Ayn Rand believed, that if you do that, if you hold on to free market ideas, but you don't change your philosophy, the world will not change. That is, you cannot be convincing and you cannot be consistent, because ultimately your morality and your philosophy will undermine the validity of your economic principles. And I think Ayn Rand believed that, and I certainly agree with her. I believe that. And I think Milton Friedman was great at explaining pro-freedom, pro-capitalist ideas, economic ideas. I think he was less good at explaining, or not good at all, at explaining moral ideas, at dealing with the philosophical issues that the free market raises, or that advocacy for the free market raises. I do not believe that we can win the intellectual battle unless we win the battle for reason, unless we win the battle for egoism. That is the foundation for any political system. It's the foundation for any economic system. I think that the best economists implicitly have that, but then they don't want to give up on, again, their religion, their utilitarianism, their whatever. And that holds back the movement. I've said this many times, that the world would be already changed if people like Mises and Hayek and Friedman had taken Ayn Rand seriously. Not even become objectivist. Just taken Ayn Rand seriously as a thinker and been willing to engage with her and her ideas and be willing to elevate her to the place I think she belongs within the so-called liberty movement. If they had been willing to do that, if the great geniuses had been willing to do that, we'd be 50 years further along in the fight to liberty. Now, not only do we have to change everybody's mind, but we're still fighting against our so-called allies who advocate for free markets on the wrong philosophical premises and who make fun of Ayn Rand or dismiss her completely, which is true of all those thinkers except von Mises, who had real respect for Ayn Rand. Anyway, I wish Mises and Hayek had said, we're economists, we're not philosophers, Ayn Rand's a philosopher, let's go to her with philosophical questions. We're economists. But they didn't do that, and Milton Friedman didn't do that. And that's a tragedy that we will not recover from. A tragedy we will not recover from. All right, Clark, why do you think it's easy for people like you and me to get abstractions easily, while 99.9% of people are at the perceptual level? Well, I don't know about 99.9%, and I don't know about whether they cannot get abstractions, because clearly there are people who can get abstractions really well in their work environment, but don't apply the same methodology to other aspects of their lives. You couldn't have a world in which 99.9% of people didn't get abstractions, and where you still had scientific progress and engineering progress, and still had programmers, right, and other positive things happening in the world, innovations. So somebody must be doing the thinking. And it can't be, I don't think it's just a 0.01%, right? Or the 0.1%. I think what happens, sadly, is that people are very compartmentalized. They are willing and able to engage their mind, to bring forward the energy and the focus needed to think, and therefore to engage in abstract thought for certain things, like certain aspects of their career. But when it comes to things that either where emotions dominate, like personal life, or where it might be controversial and they don't deem themselves necessarily experts, like politics, they just suppress that ability. They just find it, quote, in a sense, easier to just not think. Now, I don't think it's easier. I think it's damaging and horrific and so on. And they haven't been trained. that this methodology that they use when they do science, the methodology what they use to some extent when they do their work. I mean, think about the abstract thinking that goes into designing and running and facilitating a supply chain. What it takes to bring the hundreds of components from 43 different countries into and putting into one of these, and dealing with the challenges that presents, and dealing with the obstacles and the I mean, people at Apple are brilliant at that kind of abstract thought. But when it comes to politics or their own life or other things, they fail. In that sense, they're completely compartmentalized. And that is something that I think, unfortunately, we are taught. You know, when you do math and science, use reason. If you're lucky, right? Use reason. But when it comes to humanities and history and all, that's all subjective. That doesn't matter. And what we really care about, children, is your emotions. How do you feel today? What do you feel like? What is your opinion? Ask a 6-year-old of the Israeli Gaza. You feel like it's threatening, and just to touch on the topic we're going to come to in a minute, you feel like a boy or girl today? What do you feel like? I mean, we've elevated emotions above everything else. And this is the consequence, Clark. The consequence is that people lose the ability and the incentive and the motivation and the will to actually engage in abstract thought outside of the place where they think they absolutely need it and where it's absolutely crucial. All right. John says, he even writes himself in an identical twin brother, Donald, who is more free spirit and loves life. They have different writing styles. Charlie's a neurotic naturalist and Donald's an easygoing romanticist. What am I missing here? It seems like that is a part 2 of something. Oh, I see. This, you start out with a $10 question and you end with the 20, and I'm reading the 20 first because that's what I do. If you want to do a chain, start with the 20 and then go to the 10, not the other way around. All right, let me try to do this. All right. John says, you are what you love, not what loves you back. Nicolas Cage as Donald Kaufman in the movie Adaptation. Have you seen this movie? I don't think so. What do you think of this quote? I think it's an excellent quote. I think that you are what you love, or put it in kind of more objectivist or more philosophical terminology. You are what you value. You are what you value, and that includes your moral values, and therefore that includes what your character is, because your character is shaped by the moral values you choose and how consistently you live up to them. So you love what you love, or your values, so you are what you values, you are what you love. And it's certainly not what loves you back. You are not what loves you back, because that would make you completely second-handed. That would make you just reflecting back what other people see in you rather than what you have created. You have created yourself. You've created your soul. You've created your soul. I'm going too fast today. By creating your values, by creating what you care about, by choosing what to love. Choosing what to love. So I like that quote. Okay, John goes on. Charlie Kaufman writes himself into a screenplay for an adaptation of a book he's writing. I think it's a metaphor for how you can't just avoid the value judgment of the artist into the art, right? Could you read out to Rudy Rochman to have him as a guest? He's a this is a different question. Okay, let me go back. So here's John's continuation. That was Liam. He even writes himself in an identical twin brother, Donald, who is more free-spirited and loves life. They have different writing styles. Charlie is a neurotic naturalist, and Donald an easygoing romanticist. That is super interesting. I have not seen the movie. I'm going to write it down. put on my list to try to see. And I will get back to you. But that does sound really interesting. And I like that quote. Michael, why do you say altruism is more explicit in foreign policy than domestic? Is the welfare state or Social Security somehow more concealed in quasi-egoistic language? Sometimes it is, right? But I think it's because the stakes in foreign policy are life and death. What you're sending kids to do is die. For what? For nothing. For the enemy. For the enemy's young people. So foreign policy, the stakes are so much higher. The stakes are literally life and death. Most discussions of welfare are, particularly today, given that we've just accepted welfare, should we raise it a little bit? Should we lower it a little bit? Yes, and all of that is driven by altruism. And all of that, you find altruism all over the place. But in foreign policy, it's so black and white. It's not tinkering with an existing system. It's literally, should we send our kids to die for this cause or shouldn't we? Should we support the good guys who serve our interests, whose interests are consistent with ours, or should we hamper the good guys because somebody might suffer? Which is so, and who is going to suffer? People who ultimately hate us and will actually ultimately attack us, and we know it. Says Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, Russia. So it's so life or death, so black and white that it really rises to that level of explicitness, and of the sacrifice really rises to the level of being so, again, life or death in domestic policy. And that's what I meant by it. It's not that domestic policy is not rife, filled everywhere with altruism. It is. It is. Almost everything is justified by altruism. John Glue, Yaron, have you seen the movie Old by M. Night Shyamalan? It sucks. He clearly thinks the bottleneck of biological advancement is time as opposed to freedom. All the time in the world amounts to nothing without freedom. Absolutely. I haven't seen the movie. I don't like him. He strikes me as a filmmaker who likes gimmicks for the sake of gimmicks. I also don't like horror movies, and a lot of his movies are horror movies. I just don't like him. But yes, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that that's what he thinks. I think a lot of people think that. I remember reading a book by these environmentalists, and their solution to environmentalist problems was, oh, we'll come up with a technology that does X. And it was like, that will just happen. No, no consideration of what it takes to innovate, what it takes to come up with new technology, what the process is, the need for freedom as a element, but also these are leftists, so these are people who like to tax entrepreneurs to hell, so no idea of incentives, no idea of the whole structure, capitalism, how you allocate capital, none of that. None of that. Just ignore that. Innovation will happen. It'll free us from this whatever problem we have. So that is, so it doesn't surprise me that he would come up with that. It is interesting. I was just talking to somebody about one of the questions of why did the United States and the UK basically come up with an atomic bomb during World War II, and Germany, Russia, and Japan, who were working on it, could not? And the answer is twofold. One is because all the good minds, particularly in Germany, left and came to work for the West because they were many of them were Jews, and the ones that didn't want to work under an authoritarian thuggery. And the second was freedom. The only way you really advance is through freedom. And the problems of building an atomic bomb while theoretically understandable, the actual logistics, the actual construction of it, is challenging and is super difficult and requires trial and error and requires people to be able to have not an open mind, but a mind open to new ideas and being willingness to express and so on. And that you don't get in authoritarian regimes. That you need, all of that you need freedom for, right? You need freedom for. All right. If you have a question, a comment, a disagreement, something you want to say, the way to do that is to use the Super Chat. Super Chat is the way in which I interact with you. I'm not going to read the chat, and I'm going to try not to read the chat, and I try not to respond to chat, and I'm increasingly going to be ignoring you on the chat. So if you really have something you want to say, and you want me to see, and you want me to respond to, the Super Chat is available to you. All right, let's do these Super Chats. We are. I think we're a little behind now. We were ahead earlier. We're a little behind on the Super Chat. We've still got $400 to go to make our goal of $750. Or, if you will, we've done an hour and a half, so that would be $375. For that, we've only missing $20. We'd be there. But we have to keep it up. So generally, as I said yesterday, I'm going to set targets that basically reflect $250 for every half hour of live show that I do. My expectation is today that we go for 3 hours. At least I've made myself available 3 hours. A lot of that will depend on how many questions you guys have and how and whether you use the Super Chat. This, to a large extent, will determine whether this format is workable for me from a financial perspective versus the previous format. We'll see whether we can bring in an equivalent amount of funding. All right. So Michael says, did you see Macklemore's new anti-Israel video supporting the pro-Hamas protesters? No, I have not seen it. I don't know who Macklemore is, but I have not seen a pro-Hamas video. John, Scott Galloway's popular TED Talk on how baby boomers have financially crippled their children. I don't agree with his solutions, but the statistics all correct, look correct, suggest you watch them all. I'll take a look. I'm suspicious of the statistics. I'm really suspicious of the statistics. I certainly think that baby boomers have crippled their children and grandchildren and generations in the future financially, but not because of the statistics that they would present, but because of what would have been possible. The reality is, as I've told you, and as I know people refuse to accept, actually, The Economist have the cover story for this week, so last week's Economist magazine, is about how good Gen Z is doing, right? How good Gen Z is doing. Gen Z is, by every reasonable measure, richer at this point in their life than any other generation before them. And it turns out that while the millennials had a really rough time, particularly during COVID, the millennials are now way ahead of previous generations. So it's still true, at least in America, and still true over much of the world, that each progressive generation is, in an aggregate sense, average sense at least, doing better than previous generations. So, but I will look at that because I'm curious what statistics they're using. I will talk also this week. I'll do a show on how academics misuse statistics in economics and how they literally deceive you with the way they calculate their variables to get the result that they want. And I'll be using taxes and taxes on billionaires and taxes on the poor to illustrate the point, and we'll be doing that either tomorrow or the day after. So I'm going to do Tucker and Dugan and academics using statistics to fool you, or using graphs and models to fool you easily. But so I don't trust when people put up graphs like that and put up economic data like that. You've got to dig. You've got to really dig to figure out if the numbers are real. If the numbers are real, what they're presenting is true, if it makes sense. It's very hard. You know, these kind of aggregate economic studies, very hard to do and very hard to analyze in terms of whether it makes sense or not. Lab-grown meat would be best for the U.S. military men, Frank says. Why is that? Why is that? I mean, imagine if we could include in the lab-grown meat only good stuff, make it more nutritious, and make it more flavorful. Take the kind of ideal concept of flavor of meat and put it in there. Now, I don't know that that's possible, but imagine if that's possible. It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, the idea that that you should be afraid of lab-grown meat is just insane. It is insane. There's going to be a scientific process. They're going to figure this out. They have no incentive, just like McDonald's doesn't have an incentive to literally poison you all. These companies have no incentive to poison you. They're motivated by the right things. They are doing real science, and to be skeptical of this before it's even become a reality is to be anti-science, and it's to be anti-scientist. So, it's to be a statist ultimately. It's to say we need the state to protect us from this stuff. We need DeSantis to liberate us, because without DeSantis, those evil entrepreneurs would be killing us all. James, could Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead been written in a different way to change the culture faster? I mean, I don't know. I mean, and the purpose of Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead is not to change the culture. That's putting the cart before the horse. So it's a silly question. Sorry, James. It's not a... the books were written as novels. They were written for you to experience a novel, for you to experience the aesthetic experience of a novel. They weren't written to change the culture. They weren't written as propaganda. I don't know what it takes to change the culture and if you could do it more effectively in a book, but that's not the purpose of the books. Harper Campbell, why do you say Christianity is emasculating? Well, because Christianity is the worship of the meek, the worship of the poor, the worship of the struggling, the worship of those who are unsuccessful. It is the suppression of male sexual desires, never mind female sexual desires. I mean, whipping yourself when you think sexual thoughts and rolling around in snow to suppress sexual urges is not exactly a masculine thing to do. It's emasculating. Putting yourself on a cross in order to sacrifice for the sins of others, not your sins, is not a masculine thing to do. Irrationality and emotionalism, which I think Christianity is very strong on, is not a masculine thing to do. Turning the other cheek, loving your enemy, all of that, not masculine. Now, why was Christianity so good at fighting battles and winning wars? That's not Christianity. That's Rome. Christianity was awful at that, and was open for the slaughter. And what it brought masculinity, if you will, into Christianity, But as an outside force, clearly an outside force, was Rome. Was starting with Constantine on, is the adoption of Christianity by Roman empires and emperors and Roman culture and embracing it. And they had to rewrite. The interpretation of the founding documents of Christianity in order to accommodate war and in order to accommodate knights. But it's fascinating if you read the history, how they did this and how they did this successfully. They had to have one dogma, and then they had to get permission. So Augustine basically provides permission to use violence against infidels if it's in the service of Christianity, if it moves them to convert. But whatever masculine elements Christians exhibited during the era, during the centuries post, 350, 400 AD, are Roman. And then you get the Holy Roman Empire, which is, again, inspired by Rome. Holy Roman Empire, is inspired by Rome. It's not inspired by Christianity. So, but it's interesting how Christianity, one of the things that made Christianity so successful was it was willing to adapt. It was willing to completely shape-shift in order to accommodate the pagan culture. So, for example, when Christianity arrived in England, and England was a culture of knights and battles and war, and everything was about war, Christianity just adapted to that. And it was Christianity in England was in its early stages, very, very different than Christianity in mainland Europe, in let's say, Italy. It was much more oriented towards knights and fighting and stuff like that. And so Christianity is a shape-shifting religion that adapts to the circumstances, and that fundamentally is what has allowed it to survive. It would have died a long, long time ago. So, but in its origins, it is about wanting to wash the feet of beggars. That's not particularly masculine. Harper Campbell, all emotional experiences generated by how we interpret our situation. Yes, how we interpret the situation and what our value hierarchy is and what our conclusions about the values at risk or at play and our interpretation of that situation are. And all of that is happening quickly, automatically in our subconscious, and the emotion is the sum of that, the response to all of that, right? Apollos is, I asked about the Bond girls a while back, but who is the best looking woman model or celebrity, someone you know, that you can bring to mind and why? Oh God, but this is completely subjective. There's no, I don't know, Angelina Jolie. I think she's gorgeous. Salma Hayek. I think she's unbelievably sexy and gorgeous. That's my type for whatever reason. I think Angelina Jolie can be really tough, but she exudes a certain femininity. I think Salma Hayek certainly does. I'm sure there are others. I'm not a huge fan of Marilyn Monroe, only because there's too much of her being a little ditzy for my liking. She's too much of the dumb blonde, which she plays the stereotype too often in the movies, not necessarily in real life, but in the movies. I like my women smart. I'm trying to think of other actresses. There are lots of other actresses who do, and it also depends on the role. It depends on the movie. It depends on what they're doing. So I'm trying to think of. There are lots of others, but names on. It's not good to ask me these questions on the fly because the names don't necessarily come to me. Fen Hopper, what was the name of the health book with the idea of live well, die fast, you mentioned before here on the show? Peter Attia's, what's it called? It's Peter Attia's book, and it's You see, names don't come to me, so I don't remember them. Somebody on the chat, help me out. What is Peter Attia's best-selling book? Lifespan. No, Lifespan is a different book. Maybe it is Lifespan. Let's do a search. Peter Attia. God, you have to put book in there as well as what doesn't bring you the book. Book. Google, tell me what the book is. Outlive. Outlive, the Science and Art of Longevity. And there he talks about health span. Yeah. Nick Fo. How do objectivists view nukes, e.g. the military posturing, proliferation, non-proliferation, disarmament, etc.? Poll scientists are split on this issue. Objectivists view nukes. We like nukes when the good guys have them, and we hate them when the bad guys have them. I mean, if we can stop bad guys from getting nukes, that would definitely be a foreign policy goal. Foreign policy goal should be to stop bad guys from getting nukes. So any kind of non-proliferation would be good for bad guys. But other than that, if nukes are necessary for Taiwan to defend itself, nukes are necessary to provide mutually assured destruction or something like that as a protection, then go for it. Get the nukes. Maybe the world would be safer if Taiwan had nukes and if Israel's nuclear program was explicit, out in the open, not hidden away somewhere. All right, Liam, could you reach out to Rudy Rochman to have him on the show? He's a pro-Israel graduate at Columbia University who just finished serving in the IDF. He has very big YouTube channel and following. I certainly can look into that. Thank you, Liam. I can look into that. I have not seen his stuff, but I can check it out. All right. A lot of people suggesting stuff for me to do. Today, Apollo, Dr. Brook, are you a collectivist? I know because someone in the chat said so. Explain yourself. I think the answer to that is simple. No, I'm not a collectivist. Next question. Apollo, a lot of women are attracted to a man who can protect them. Who are stronger and can fight? Your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. But I think that's activating, kind of the perceptual level mentality. To really protect a woman today, you need to be smart. To really protect a woman today, even at the level of protection, you need to be rational. You need to be able to earn a living. You need to be able to be successful. You need to be able to build the resources. And so again, masculinity in today's non-perceptual level world is more about your competence in thinking and acting those thoughts and executing on the thoughts and achieving success in reality and in the world out there. It's about the pursuit of values and achieving them. And it's not about physical strength and being able to fight. And women who are attracted to physical strength and being able to fight are not particularly impressive women. They're not women I would be interested in, right? I want a woman who is attracted to me because of my mind, my values, my character, not because of how well I can fight in a cage. Again, that is kind of the caveman mentality, the perceptual level mentality, and I want a woman who is at the conceptual level of a mentality, at the abstract level of mentality, that's looking for a conceptual, right? Dagny doesn't go around looking for somebody who can do MMA. She's looking for somebody who can build a motor that revolutionizes energy production. Not really, but somebody who has the character and the ability to do something like that, right? And, I don't know of real intelligent, smart, able women who are looking and figuring out if men, how much you can bench press, right? I don't think that's a criteria for romance for a rational woman. Now, whether you take care of yourself or not, maybe, right? There is aesthetic value in how you look, but lots of women fall in love with men who are not particularly physically fit. So, but some of you know what women want more than men because they're super smart, because they have great character, because they're incredible in bed. It could be a lot of things why women fall for somebody who might not be Adonis in terms of how he looks. So, I mean, you want to categorize all women. All women want good-looking guys who are smart. No, I don't think that's true. And the stats show is not an argument. Jeremy says, great commentary today. Thanks, Yaron. I do believe the former show's schedule had increased opportunity for engagement and may have been easier to digest in 2 segments. I think that's probably right. I think this segment now, and it also brings different people, right? So in the previous structure of the show, now we would take 3-hour break, and different people would show up in the evening, and because they were different people, they had they would bring fresh wallets, if you will. There would be different people willing to spend different amounts on this. So maybe the fact that I'm trying to do this all in 3 hours suppresses the amount of money coming in during those 3 hours. We will see. I'm not convinced that that's the case yet, but it certainly is a possibility. All right, let's jump to the topic, to our main topic for today. See if we get any more super chat questions around that topic. See if I can reignite the curiosity and thinking you might have in one show rather than in 2. So this is again a break. And we are shifting topics. All right. So let me just see where I was. Over the last decade or so, there have been, or put it this way, over the last few years, there have been increasing reports about young people, children, early teens, prepubescent teens, being treated at certain facilities. In the UK, it was all concentrated in one facility, and that was Tavistock, which was an NIH facility that specialized in dealing with young people who are having gender dysphoria, that believed that for some reason they should be a different gender, and they were born the wrong sex, if you will. And there was one facility in the UK that dealt with all these patients and with all these kind of challenges, all these kind of children really feeling this and this becoming a medical issue. And there have been rumors and whistleblower reports about really abusive behavior going on in Tavistock. And abusive behavior really was focused on providing these children with things like blocking puberty blockers, so preventing them from achieving puberty, or giving girls who want to become men masculine hormones, and men who want to become women female hormones, in order to change basically the functioning of their body. And this was happening to children, prepubescent, so young children, and there was a lot of angst about what was happening, particularly in Tavistock in the United States. It's happening in all kinds of private institutions all over the country, although a number of red states now have passed laws to prohibit providing this kind of treatment to anybody, I think, younger than 18. A lot of this came out of a study that was done in the Netherlands, and in this study, they had taken some children who had gender dysphoria, given them these puberty blockers, and then given them these hormones. Ultimately, I think some of them got the surgery, and the conclusion of all of this Dutch study was, and this is was that this was the way to treat the dysphoria. The results were presented as positive results. The results were presented as this solves this problem of these children being confused. They get this treatment, and all is good. Anyway, for a number of years now, there have been doubts about this conclusion of all is good. A number of kids who have had this treatment and became adults tried to detransition, try to go backwards, and found it very difficult, found that what they had done to themselves as children, or what was done to them really as children, given that they're children, was irreversible. And given that they now wanted their previous identity, their previous biology back, they regretted the whole thing and raised real questions about what is being done to these children that's truly irreversible, and is it true that this is all healthy and good and solves these real problems that people have in terms of their so-called what they feel their gender is. Over the last 10 years or so, there's been a real explosion in the number of kids who claim to have gender dysphoria. Now, the numbers are still small, so I don't think we should exaggerate the issue here. But the reality is that the numbers have grown significantly, and all in a relatively short period of time. I mean, for example, in 1989, when Tavistock was first established, or put it this way, it was first established in 1989, so it's quite a while ago. In 2009, they saw 80 patients. In the whole year of 2009, they saw 80 patients. This is 20 years after they were established. By 2019, they saw 2,700 patients. So 89 started, got to 80 patients by 2009, and by 2019, 2,700 patients. And indeed, it is this 10 years, from about 2009 to about 2019, that saw a real explosion in this issue. And nobody has a complete explanation for what it is, what caused children and teenagers to suddenly have this gender dysphoria. Now, there are a lot of potential explanations. One could be, and this is one that a lot of people claim, is that in the past, there were just as many children, but their parents shut them down. It was suppressed. It was denied. And the reason you got such large numbers was because it was more socially acceptable to admit that you had this issue. Other people have said that it's because, people are being propagandized that it's cool. And therefore, it became cool to be this. And some people who didn't actually feel it now are pretending to feel it because it was now cool to do it. Others have claimed, I'm sure, RFK would probably go with this, that it's maybe something in our environment, that it changed the biology or changed the whatever nature that we have that determines these feelings are there, and others, I would argue that a lot of it has to do with, I would argue that the primary cause of this is the elevation of emotion above everything else, that the worship of emotion, the idea that a child's emotion are really the only important thing. And so that if a girl said, "Oh, I really should have been a boy," the parents take that seriously. Whereas in the past they would have said, "Yeah, she's a tomboy. She'll get over it." And now it's completely taken seriously, and now you take her to the doctor because she said she might be a boy, because we take that emotion as the primary, and we also then it's now acceptable that this is something that's treatable, which is weird. Why would it be treatable, even if it is? So, my view is it's just this ultimate in subjectivism, the ultimate subjectivism. Now, there's no question, or it seems like there's no question to the extent that I know, that some people do have something. There is some biological basis for some people to be confused. People who have, these rare cases where they have more than just XY, where the chromosomes are mixed up, where there's a combination of chromosomes that is not normal, not purely female or purely male. We don't know a lot about that. But there's probably some people where there is real biological reasons that they, people who are born with both, obviously people who are born with both sets of sexual organs. There's also kind of strange, marginal things that happen. But that's not the reason it went from 80 to 2,700. So first, there's a phenomena that grows exponentially. The second part of the growth that happened between 2009 and 2019 has to do with who, right? And that is who was suddenly identifying as, with this gender dysphoria. And in the past, it had been predominantly boys who really felt like they should be female. And what happened in the period between 2009 and 2019, is it became primarily girls. It became overwhelmingly girls. That is, the growth rate in girls having this issue spiked, while boys, basically, the numbers stayed pretty constant. Again, why girls? More susceptible to social pressure, to coolness factor, to emotion, to the emotionalism of the time. Hard to tell. Girls who might feel left out by, or might have their, their tomboy inclinations suppressed by their friends or by their parents or by society. Maybe this is a way out. Anyway, we've seen this vast increase, primarily among girls, but not only among girls. And this is something that I think surprised people. It was unexpected. And suddenly this clinic, Tavistock and other clinics in the United States, were overwhelmed by these numbers. Now, out of the United States, out of the US, the first kind of study, in quotation marks, the first experimentations around this were done, again, in the Netherlands. But then out of the United States came the protocol of how to treat. And the protocol, again, involved suppressing puberty and giving the other sex's hormones. So hormone therapy. And this, the United States exported that and exported it as this is state of the art. This is what you do. There's science behind it. And those, when people started criticizing all this, one of the things that the proponents of treating transgenderism like this, some of the proponents of it said, look, this is the way to stop suicide. So a big part of this was it's mental health. The only way to deal with this mental health crisis that we have, which is, gender dysphoria is the mental health crisis, is the only way is to let them change, let them, play with the chemistry of the body to change their gender. And ultimately, that involves surgery and all the rest. Anyway, so there's been a lot of controversy around this. And Tavistock, again, a lot of rumors about this. There was a court case where basically in 2019 that basically said something's wrong here. Doing this to young people below the age of 16, below the age of consent, that's wrong. How can they consent to something? They don't have the faculty in order to consent to it. This is life-changing. This is altering forever. And a lot of what Tavistock, a lot of the functionality of Tavistock was shut down, particularly when it comes to younger ages, was shut down a few years ago as a consequence. But in the meantime, remember in England, all this healthcare is provided by the state. The NHS appointed a commission, actually one person, Hilary Cass, a physician, basically to do an independent review. She was the chair of this independent review into gender identity services in the UK. She was given access, supposedly, to records, to studies, to the science. She was given access to some of the children who'd had these procedures put on them. And she spent, I think, 3 years delving deep into this issue. Now, she is a pediatric. She was I think she's headed up the pediatric, the medical association. So she's highly qualified physician, highly qualified doctor. And if you read the report, if you read summaries of the report, or you see her on television, she strikes one as super reasonable and very open and reasonable and focused on science. Anyway, these are some of her conclusions. Now, you might not agree with all of her conclusions, and particularly, you might not agree with all of her conclusions, but these are the conclusions she came to. And this is pretty devastating to the trans movement, particularly the trans movement, parts of the trans movement focused on children, focused on trying to get children to transition. And it's brutal towards them. And it's interesting to see how the trans movement has responded. And in particular, to see, how it's responded in the US. In the UK, the response can be kind of uniform because the government can decide not to fund these things. But in the US, it's almost completely a political issue rather than a health issue. And we're seeing blue and red states divide on this rather than everybody looking at the science and deciding what to do. Anyway, these are some of the conclusions I'm reading from a summary of the review. First, there's no simple explanation for the increase in numbers of predominantly young people and young adults who have a trans or gender diverse identity or claim to have one. But there's broad agreement that it is a result of a complex interplay between biology, psychological and social factors. This balance of factors will be different in each individual. So one of the things I like about this study is she does try to treat people as individuals. Now, I think most of the drivers here are psychological, particularly for the increase. Maybe there's a physiological reason for a very small number of people. But in terms of an increase, the increase here is social and psychological. And it's important to get to the root of what that social and psychological reason is. By the way, one example of this, which she talks about, with Hilary Cass talks about in one of the interviews I saw, but that also Andrew Sullivan, the gay conservative writer who I debated at Clemson University, he writes about is this idea that transitioning, in a sense, was a solution for gay kids, right? Let's say you're gay. Let's say you discover you're gay when you're young. You're attracted. You're a guy. You're a male, and you're attracted to other males. But you're also in a culture that's very homophobic, and maybe you've adopted that. You hate the idea of gayness. You hate the idea of homosexuality. You want to deny it. You want to resent it. You want to reject it. Well, one way to do that and appease yourself psychologically is basically to say to yourself, well, I'm not really a man. I'm a woman, and I'm attracted to a man, and that's normal. So you're willing to transition in order to avoid facing your own homosexuality. And I think that is, that is probably the case in many of these cases. I mean, if you read Andrew Sullivan, he has an article about this. I mean, he's infuriated by this trans movement and just, and thinks that it's basically an attempt to, to go after gay kids and to destroy gay kids, and that the victims of this are almost all gay kids. He says 80% of the children subject to this experiment, this transitioning, were of a marginalized group, gay kids. And the result of these procedures, he says, was to cure them of the same-sex attraction by converting them to the opposite sex. And he says, how can anybody support such a thing? So there's evidence that is a chunk of it. A chunk of it. Now, it is surprising that there's so much antagonism towards gayness or towards being homosexual, given how acceptable it has become in our culture. So that would be my one caveat about that. You wouldn't have expected it. But it's still not completely acceptable to be gay, and it turns out that some kids internalize the hatred of homosexuality on themselves, and it's easier for them to transition, which I find just bizarre, because transitioning is, just think about how horrific that is. So, she basically says, we don't completely know why this is happening. But then the question is, what do you do about it? And basically your conclusions are this. There is just no good, no decent even science behind transitioning. There's no science that shows, for example, that if you transition kids, they commit suicide less. That if you transition kids who express gender dysphoria, that they are less depressed, that they have less psychological. There's just zero evidence of any of that. All the things that the pro-transitioning crowd has argued for are just not real. She says the science that people have been quoting for years and years and years about this stuff is pathetic. It's not good science. Bad science permeates this field. Everywhere she looked at the scientific literature was just way below par. Now, she says there's no science to show that this is harmful, but there's no science. You don't do these kind of medical procedures in the face of no science, no evidence, no proof that this actually works. So, this idea of using mascularizing or feminizing hormones, right, in underage kids, we don't know what effect that has on them. We don't know what effect it has on their future. We don't know to what extent it's reversible or not. We have no idea. There are no studies determining what the long-term effects are. There's no real follow-up data. It's another thing that she discovered. The NHS does all this stuff, and there's no follow-up data. No, this is exactly science. This is science that's showing that what they were doing is hackery. But the only way to show that what they were doing is hackery is through science. So, Ken, as always, you're just being dishonest. You might have, as you claim, a high IQ, but a high IQ with a dishonest person is wasted garbage. And that's what you are. It's just infuriating, the stupidity of these people. Sorry. Now, the very idea of taking children and running them through experiments that change their very biology is horrific. It should have never been allowed. Fundamentally immoral, but is illegal. It is a violation of the child's rights. It is, in my view, child abuse. Children should have never been allowed to do this. Parents should have never been given the power to consent or not to consent, unless there was some significant medical reason that necessitated the procedure. But in the absence of scientific evidence, in the absence of scientific proof that this is safe and worth doing, scientific proof, to do this is so medically irresponsible, so scientifically irresponsible, that you would expect the scientific establishment, the people responsible for this, the doctors, the psychologists, to resign en masse, given what this report shows. No scientific basis. No positive outcomes, or no proof of positive outcomes. Now, when you're 18, you want to take hormones, you want to change your gender, you want to go through surgery, your problem. I have no qualms in terms of legally allowing people to do that. You want to, you know, in some cases, you want to screw up your life completely, screw them up. All right, my last comment. Ken, you don't know what you're talking about. You just don't know. You're ignorant. You don't understand science. You have no idea about COVID or about artificial meat or about anything scientific. You're an ignoramus, so leave it alone. Now, I need to be better disciplined and to ignore him because he's really not worth commenting. So from now on, I will try to apply that principle. It's hard for me. I have to admit, it's one of those things that even I know it's wrong to feed him because people like him live off of. You research COVID like crazy, but when you have your kind of abilities and dishonesty, you're going to come to wrong conclusions. There, I did it again. I find it very difficult to not to engage with stupidity. It was like, you know, when I see the Hamas demonstrations out in the street, my first instinct is to go up and start yelling at them, and I really have to make an effort to hold myself back not to do it. And there, the damage is physical damage. Here, it's just, you know, being obnoxious and maybe losing some of you. All right, let's get back to this. I mean, this is child abuse. Now, it appears that in the UK, this is being taken very seriously. It appears that in the UK, right? It appears that in the UK, the authorities are going to dramatically restrict what these doctors can and cannot do. I do think that there has to be a reckoning within the profession. There has to be a reckoning among the people who actually facilitated this, who actually made this happen. It is said that in the United States, in some clinics, when a child comes in claiming sexual dysphoria, that they are given puberty blockers after 1 or 2 visits. You can't figure out, I mean, there are a lot of much more simple with fewer long-term consequences, procedures that require multiple visits and multiple investigations and multiple considerations, and yet something like this that is literally life-changing, and where a child has no capacity to deal with the long-term consequences. Doctors are recommending treatment on the basis of one or two. These people should be kicked out of the profession. So I think in the UK, the recommendations of the CAS committee are going to be taken seriously, partially because it's centralized authority, all of it through the NHS. They have the ability to change everything all at once. Tavistock, I think, has been shut down. I think they're basically going to ban the ability to do any of these treatments for anybody under 16. I think over the ages between 16 and 18, there's going to be very, very high barriers. In England, in the UK, the age of consent is 16. So there is a legal argument that people at 16 can make this decision. But, you know, CAS says, no, it should be 18. It should not be 16. A lot of kids at 16 are not in a position to be able to make these kind of decisions. So there's a real push to limit it to 16. Now we'll see, because there's a massive backlash against this. As you might know, the trans activists are nasty, nasty, nasty people. I mean, Cass, this woman, doctor, she can't get on public transport now without being harassed, without her life being threatened by trans activists. She's constantly suffering from abuse from people around her for basically being a scientist. Now, we know this from how J.K. Rowling has been treated for having pretty rational, pretty mild, rational views on trans issues. And yet she is being shunned, abused, her life is being threatened as a consequence. This is the wacky left. The wacky left is an authoritarian left. The wacky left is a left, in this case, that wants to, and is dedicated really to, rejecting A as A, rejecting identity, rejecting nature. Everything should be possible if we feel it. Everything should be guided by our emotions. Tell with reason, tell with science, tell with thought. It's all about emotion, feelings, and we should cater to everybody's emotions and feelings. At least cater to the emotions and feelings of those who feel oppressed, right? Those who are struggling, those who are different. Intersectionality, oppressor, oppressed, all of that. So there is a massive backlash against this. This is really, John, absolutely, this is really a manifestation of the primacy of consciousness, a real manifestation of the primacy of consciousness, which is what the left has embraced. And again, here you have a merging of the left and right, as you do often. The left has a primacy of consciousness in an individual's mind or an individual's emotional state. The right's primacy of consciousness is like God's consciousness, right? A consciousness outside of you, and it's the reflection on that. But it's all primacy of consciousness. You know, let's pray for it. The prayer is primacy of consciousness, but you're appealing to a consciousness out there. The left's consciousness is in you as an individual, but it is the primary and it is the most important thing, and it is what shapes reality. Reality is determined by your consciousness. Consciousness is not just a tool, is not the tool by which we observe, integrate, the evidence that is given to us about reality, the data that is provided to us about reality, it makes reality up. In particular, it makes reality up about ourselves. And when you don't have kind of an objective grasp of human identity, if your guide is not human reason, if your guide, and we'll talk about this because this raises a point that Dugan and Tucker Carlson raised. We'll talk about that tomorrow or the next day. We'll talk about it this week. It's very similar. Is if you get to a point of subjectivism and primacy of consciousness, of cultivating and focusing on emotion at all other costs, then this is the state you get to. This is the point where, you know, what you want to do is just whatever you feel like, that has to happen. You demand that happens. And if that emotion is leading you to be one of these so-called oppressed minorities, then you have a political right to make that happen. In the United States, I haven't seen much in terms of discussion of the caste review. Again, some red states, some Republican states have passed laws prohibiting transitioning therapy for children. I think on this, they probably do it for all the wrong reasons, but it's the right laws. So I agree with that as a law. But you know, the reality is that kids can still leave and go to other states like California, where children can get transitioned without parental authority. There are states, I think Washington, Oregon, places like that, where parents who don't approve of their child transitioning can be accused of, of child abuse. It's just unbelievable how little the left cares about children. And they use pseudoscience, not science, but pseudoscience, in order to justify their claims. And one of the great things about the caste review is that she approaches this as a scientist. And therefore, what she calls them out on is not a political agenda, and it's not even a philosophical argument. What she calls them out on is the scientific claims you're making are pseudoscience. There is no science behind what you are arguing. There is no science behind what you are arguing. So this is I think the value of this. I expect that the backlash against the trans movement, particularly as it relates to children, will increase. I mean, there should be laws on the books across the country to stop mutilating children. If adults want to mutilate themselves, go at it. But to do this to children is truly horrific and scary. It's scary. It's scary, particularly given that in some states, again, the politics of it are such that the child's feelings are more important than the authority of the parent. And the willingness of these crazy doctors to go ahead with these procedures without necessarily having parental approval, when the science, again, according to Cass, is clearly saying, stop, you don't know what you're doing, and the long-term consequences are horrific. And now the numbers of stories of people coming out that are regretting the whole thing, where this is to a large extent destroyed their lives because it's irreversible. It's just horrific. It's just horrific. And it's time that it stopped, and it's time that it stopped everywhere, everywhere. All right. Questions on this, on the whole, on sexuality, gender, to the extent that I have answers, I don't know that I do, and the whole transgender phenomena and transitioning among children. That would be great. Happy to take any of those questions, or just about the left, or about anything. We're still quite a bit short of our targets for these shows, so let's see if there are any more questions out there. I guess one of the things, let me just say as commentary, as an aside, one of the things that is unfortunate about the chat for this show, I think is unfortunate, is there's probably 4 or 5 people who are most active on the chat and who have literally the least to contribute. And yet they tend to dominate the chat. And I wonder to what extent that keeps people who would have something to contribute and would be productive members of the chat from actually, participating. So, and then, I get it that some people just show up and say, Yaron's a collectivist, and then leave. But then you have people who, clearly despise me and the views I hold, and yet, are the most active people in the chat. And now, put aside, I've already told you in the past what I think about their lives. I mean, these are obviously people with pretty pathetic lives who spend them in this particular way. It's a pretty sad state of affairs when people spend 3 hours listening to somebody they disagree with, dislike, and then feel the need to comment on everything, as if, maybe it gives them a sense of importance somehow. And maybe the only way to starve them out is just to start ignoring them. I know a lot of you engage with them, but maybe the way to actually do this is to actually to ignore them, right? So, I don't know. I just find that it's unpleasant. I'll say who complains about this the most are the people who listen to the show not live, which is a vast majority of people. 10x, 20x of the number of people listen after the fact, don't listen live, and they don't see the chat, and so my motivation, I guess, starting tomorrow, to simply ignore the commentary from these people is to make sure that the people who listen to the show are happy, because they're the ones who support it and they're the ones who make the show possible. All right. And so I encourage you guys to stop feeding them, because it really is ugly. It really is ugly. All right. Questions on anything? Any topic, this in particular, but anything else as well. We start with Corey. Corey, thank you. 100 Australian dollars. Really, really appreciate that. Do you see the rise in popularity of combat sports over the past 15 years to be the return of the view that might makes right? I'm thinking of the popular internet personalities who decide to settle disagreements in a boxing ring that draws big money and viewership. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I don't know that didn't exist in the past. Boxing was huge in the past. Boxing is probably a lot less today. And in boxing's, instead of boxing, you get all these martial arts type of cage fights and things like that. And the idea that Zuckerberg and Elon Musk would get into a cage and fight it out, that seems like childish pseudo-manliness, pseudo-masculinity on their part, them trying to prove that they are just one of the thing, to prove that they're just one of the boys and one of the guys, even though they're clearly not one of the boys and one of the guys. The geniuses who move this world. And they're not, that's enough for them. They have to get into a ring to fight it out. Now, the good thing is they never got into the ring and they never did fight it out. So I'm not sure what other personalities are actually going at it, right? They might talk the talk, but they're not actually going at it. I don't think it's about might makes right. I think it's about a Andrew Tate sick kind of, perspective on masculinity that involves being able to fight, that involves physical strength. And it comes from these tech entrepreneurs who, I guess, are not satisfied with changing the world, with being unbelievably successful, with dominating their space and all of that. And they want to show that they also have this other aspect of masculinity that is physical strength and violence. And that's sad to me. I mean, you can't see Steve Jobs doing that, or even any of the, I guess, older generation of Silicon Valley doing it. It's these younger Silicon Valley guys that seem to have this identity crisis. Steve Jobs was so comfortable in his own skin, was so comfortable with who he was, was so comfortable with his own, if you will, masculinity. His masculinity was reflected in his stage presence, his ability to command an audience, his ability to have an idea and execute on it and get it done. I mean, the guy was, I think, should be and is a symbol of masculinity. Could he win a cage fight? Probably not. Did he know martial arts? Probably not. But it seems like Zuckerberg, it's not good enough. He has to go learn martial arts as well. He has to go, it's not good enough to change the world from a business perspective. You actually have to go and physically prove your masculinity. So it's this false view of masculinity, which gets repeated over and over again, associated with Conan the Barbarian. That's real men are Conan the Barbarians. No, real men are Steve Jobs. In the 21st century, real men are Steve Jobs. And not just Steve Jobs. I mean, if you look at the CEO of Microsoft, God, can you imagine that name would slip my mind? Maybe after 2.5 hours of talking, it slipped my mind. But you can't imagine Bill Gates feeling insecure enough that he needs to get into a boxing match with Jobs or with Larry Ellison or with any of these guys. He's just very, very, his masculinity comes across with his self-esteem and his confidence and his willingness to change the world and go out there and invest and do exciting, new, amazing, brilliant things. That's what made him a man. But these, for some reason, some of the entrepreneurs out there don't feel like they're real men unless they use physical force and physical violence, and that's unfortunate. So I think it has more to do than that than might making right. I think it's their sense of themselves. Corey also asks, I'm also thinking of the values some of the political right place on Putin in his strong style form of authoritarian leadership. Everything seems to be going in the direction of might makes right. I mean, yes, but again, I think even there, it has to do with might makes you a man. I mean, there were those pictures of Putin without a shirt riding a horse, and oh my God, the right was falling all over the place in love with that. So the sense in which what matters is muscle, the sense in which what matters is might, that is true. That is absolutely true. And to the extent that you extrapolate that to might is right, that is that there is a epistemological element to it, I think that's to some extent. maybe that affects more the political right than it does the entrepreneurs who are much more science-based or much more interested in truth. But there's no question that the right today values physicality, values the material, values force and might. In that sense, it's very Marxist, right? It's influenced by Marx. It values these things much more than thinking. Thinking is, I mean, it really does feel like for the new right, thinking is feminine. I'm sure for them, Steve Jobs was feminine. And what makes Musk, and by the way, Musk, you could argue that Musk is to some extent part of the right, but what makes Musk and Zuckerberg masculine is the fact that they do mixed martial arts, which is really, really dumb, right? Really dumb. But, you know, the new right is dumb. I mean, that's exactly what they are, is dumb. So I think they're very materialistic. They're very materialistic. And yes, there's a sense in which they admire might. They admire might. And they are not particularly sympathetic to the intellect. And so I definitely think, and this is why, you know, I definitely think that the right would view Bill Gates, Steve Jobs as feminine influences, and I see them as masculine. And look, I have nothing against mixed martial arts. I have nothing against jiu-jitsu. I have nothing against training. I think they're all great ways to stay in shape. They're also great ways to defend yourself if you ever need that. But to orient your thinking around masculinity and what it is and around that is just wrong, particularly wrong in a world in which changing the environment, making the environment fitting for human existence is more and more and more and more as we advance civilizationally involves the mind, to the point where soon, certainly from a historical perspective soon, muscle will be fairly irrelevant because we'll have machines do our fighting, we'll have machines do all the physical work. I mean, we won't literally have to do any physical work. We'll have to still exercise because that is going to be a requirement of staying fit and being healthy. But to survive, to thrive, we won't have to do physical labor because physical labor will be done by robots. Shali, just a question about the immigration crisis a few years back. Why were most Arabic countries, the closest to Syria, not being obliged to take in more of the refugees? Doesn't make sense policy-wise. Who is going to be doing the obliging, right? Who is going to force them to do it? Like Syria was in a civil war. People were trying to escape Syria, right? You could say, why didn't they force Turkey to take them? Well, they did in the end, right? So today, a lot of the refugees from Syria are stuck in Turkey. They're in refugee camps in Turkey. But Turkey was being overwhelmed, and Turkey didn't have any incentive to keep them. So they just sent them on to the next place, which is Greece. So, and up they went into main Europe. And a lot of it got on boats and traveled off to Cyprus. Now, you could say, why didn't they escape Syria and go to Jordan? Some of them did, and there were refugee camps of Syrian refugees in Jordan. But what would have happened if millions of them had gone to Jordan? Well, there's nothing in Jordan. It's just desert. And Jordan is an unbelievably poor country. So what would they have done there? Who would have fed them? I mean, the reason they went to Europe is because Europe's rich. There are lots of opportunities there. But a major reason they went to Europe is because Europe was subsidizing them. You know, during that period, if you arrived, if you could make it to Germany, they gave you a 3,000 euro check and an apartment. Didn't have to work for like 6 to 9 months until they figured out your visa and asylum and all of this. You got welfare. Why did they go? The 2 countries they went to, Germany and Sweden, because those were the countries that gave them the most welfare. So they were completely oriented around welfare. And what was Europe going to do? Send them to force Jordan to accept them? But Jordan didn't have the money to take care of them. And the resources. And what would have happened to them long term? No resources long term to take care of them. So there was no simple solution to this. I mean, the solution that came up in the end is basically shutting the borders down, except for the people who still sneak in, and basically cutting a deal with Turkey. The Turkey has the means, and giving Turkey money on top of the means that they have to keep the refugees in Turkey. But nobody wanted to go to Jordan. Nobody wanted to go to Iraq. Nobody wanted to go to any of these places. I mean, no Syrian would want to go there. They wanted to go places where they had long-term opportunities. Remember that even with the Muslim immigration into Europe during that period, most of the people who emigrated did it because they wanted to make their lives better. Not all of them, obviously. Some of them wanted to do that, but also wanted to keep on to the crazy Islamist ideas and are today propagating those ideas within Europe. But many of them went there because they just wanted to escape the violence and they wanted a better life. I mean, why? The Gulf states don't want to be flooded. So Shelley continues with the question. I mean, obliged, not obligated. So obliged as in welcoming. Why would they welcome them? I mean, these are refugees. Arab countries are not short of people. Birth rates are still relatively high. Most people in Arab countries are unemployed. Like Saudi Arabia, a big chunk of the population lives on welfare that the kingdom can provide because they have oil. The fact that they're all Arabs doesn't make them like each other, doesn't make them sympathetic to each other. The Saudis don't want a bunch of Palestinians. They don't want a bunch of Syrians in Saudi Arabia. They want Saudi Arabia for the Saudis, just like any other country, right? They're not happy to do it. They don't want them. They don't even show much sympathy towards them, right? I mean, this is the whole point of these demonstrations on campuses. Where were they when tens of thousands of Syrians were being killed by other Syrians? They don't care. The only reason they're demonstrating is not because of the plight of the Palestinians. The only reason they're celebrating is hatred of the Israelis. In the Syria civil war, there was nobody to hate. Both parties were pretty weak. Both parties were pretty pathetic. None of them could be easily categorized as an oppressor. So there's nobody to hate. So therefore, there's nobody to demonstrate against. The demonstrations on campuses are anti-Israel. They're not pro-Palestinian. They're pro-Hamas only in the sense that Hamas wants to destroy Israel. But this is why you can have queers for Palestine. Because they're not for Palestine. They're really queers anti-Israel. The homosexuals who are anti-Israel. They know that if they went to Palestine, they'd be killed by the Muslims. They're not for the Muslims. They're anti-Israel. They're anti-Israel because Israel is strong and wealthy and perceived to be the colonizer and the oppressor as a consequence of being strong and wealthy. That's it. It's really simple. You can always tell who they're going to root for based on who's strong and who's weak. So they don't want them. They don't care for them. They don't associate with them. They don't think they're part of them. Germany was welcoming to them out of a sense of guilt for the Holocaust. So much of German policy is driven by guilt over the Holocaust. So somebody's suffering, we need to help them. Again, guilt, altruism. Altruism, guilt here is earned by previous generations, but not earned by this generation. And then combine that with altruism, yeah. Anybody miserable out there, anybody suffering out there, we have to help them. The Arab states, other Arab states don't feel that way. They don't have Christian altruism. Islam is nowhere near as altruistic as Christianity is. Christianity is unique. In many ways, the most destructive of all religions in terms of the spirit of human beings and the nature of man. It really is the most destructive. Islam is destructive because it stayed primitive. It never evolved. But Islam in its origin, Christianity in its origin, Christianity is much worse, philosophically. Apollo Zeus. I remember you once said that as a man, a woman should or will come to you, not the other way around. I remember you once said that as a man, a woman should or will come to you, not the other way around. I was wondering if this is consistent, and if so, how Rand's view of women as man worshiper. I remember you once said that as a man, a woman should or will come to you, not the other way around. Yeah, I don't remember saying that. I don't think there's a rule here at all. I actually remember saying the exact opposite. I remember arguing against that point of view. I mean, you know, there's certain circumstances where a woman will come to you. And I have no problem with a woman taking the initiative and women asking men out to dates and women, you know, initiating contact. But, you know, and think about Ayn Rand. I don't know if you know how Ayn Rand found her husband. She saw him on a film set and, you know, liked what she saw. So she tripped him up in order to engage and get contact. So she took the initiative. So I don't think there's any problem in women taking the initiative vis-a-vis men. They're hero worshippers. And if they see a hero, there's absolutely no reason why they don't go and initiate contact. And I also have no problem with men initiating. I think for the most part, men need to initiate because for the most part, they are more oriented towards action than women. But that's not always the case. Not all men, not all women, not all circumstances. Circumstances, to a large extent, dictate this. And this is why the whole way of viewing men and women in kind of monolithic, constant, collectivistic terms is wrong. It depends on the individual man, depends on the individual woman, and it very much depends on the individual circumstances. But there's nothing wrong. If you like a woman, don't wait for her to come to you. That's ridiculous. And if you're a woman and you like a man, don't wait for him to come to you. Initiate. And if you're a man and a woman initiates, don't back off because she's hurt your masculinity. That's pathetic. Very unmasculine. I mean, talk, communicate, you know, follow your reason, follow what you really want to do. Mary Benz, if most people don't listen live, is there a way to super chat your questions to get it to the queue for the next show? Yes. I mentioned this earlier. Send me an email, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, and make your contribution on PayPal. I think that combination is best because emails I get, if you ask the question on PayPal, sometimes I miss it. But if you ask if you send me an email with the question and make the payment in PayPal, I sometimes forget, and it takes a few shows to get to it, but I will try to be more organized around it. So those of you not listening live who would like to ask a Super Chat question, just email it to me and make a contribution for whatever amount you want in PayPal. And I will load it up in the next show and try to ask the question. How did you end up motivating your capitalism course? I don't remember. It was last week, like you're asking me about last week, right? Yeah, first of all, I really try to motivate every class. So there were 8 classes. Every class got its own motivation. I landed up motivating my capitalism talk, the first class, so the whole course. I landed up motivating by the way I motivate my capitalism lectures, and that is, look how successful we have been over the last 250 years. Look how well we have done over the last 250 years. And, so how did we get here? And why do we seem to be turning against it? So I think if I remember right, that was the motivation in the first class. And then I talked about what capitalism is, a little bit about that success over the last 250 years, and then about cap. But generally, as I said last time, I thought the course went really, really well. And I was really happy with it. The people there representing the academy, the Peterson Academy, seemed super happy with it. We'll see. They're still going to do post-production on it. And I'm not sure when it'll be released, but when it is, I'll definitely let you know. And then the next, I'm doing another one on finance in 2.5 weeks, basically 3 weeks. So that'll be my second one, and we'll see. Hopefully, if these get a good reception, then they'll hire me to do some other ones. I've already proposed a bunch of other topics to be doing. So it'll be nice if this was kind of a regular gig. Thanks, Vince. John, is there something fundamentally wrong with the word worship? Does it have to have a supernatural meaning? I think of worship as a profound adoration of something real, not mystical. Am I mistaken? No, not at all. You're not mistaken at all. Ayn Rand has a whole discussion of this. I think in the introduction to the Fountainhead, in one of the versions, the introduction to Fountainhead, where she clearly talks about the fact that religion does not have a monopoly over these kind of words, like worship. There are other words that have a religious connotation, but don't have to apply to it, right? Reverence, for example, and other words like that. So no, you're absolutely right. Worship is a profound adoration for something real. And Rand talked about worship as hero worship, which was her definition of what femininity, the essence of femininity was. So, absolutely. A lot of these religious words need to be rethought of and recaptured in a secular context. Why give them the monopoly over wonderful words like that? All right, this is the last question, but if you want to contribute to the show, you can do a sticker. You can do a sticker at any level. We've got 100 people watching live right now. It wouldn't take much for us to cover the gap between where we are and where we should be. If everybody there just did something, a sticker to get us closer to the target. In any case, I'll see you the rest of the week. Shows start at 2 o'clock. Thank you, Cassandra just did 10 Canadian dollars. Really appreciate that. See, it wouldn't take a lot of people doing that amount, and we would be at our target already. Over the next few days, every show is starting at 2, like we advertise. So, and we will be talking about the use of statistics by economists to distort. And we'll be talking about Dugin's interview with Tucker Carlson. At least those are 2 of the topics we're going to be talking about this week. And then on Friday we have a positive. So Friday I'll have to come up with a positive topic. Apollo Zeus asks, have you ever read Niccolo Machiavelli? I've read parts of it. I haven't read the whole book. I've read parts of The Prince. Machiavelli is a really interesting character. He's a character during the Renaissance. He is a character who is trying to understand power and understand politics in the lens of power, and also do it all from the perspective of a secular framework. So trying to understand, he's too smart to try to distort Christian morality to fit into his perspective on power and force. So he is abandoning Christianity, and I think explicitly so. So he's really providing a secular perspective on power and force. And actually quite interesting, really interesting. I think wrong, because it's too early, right? He doesn't grasp reason. He doesn't get the purpose of politics, which is the protection of individual rights. He doesn't get any of that, right? So he's still too early for that. But I think he's a smart, nuanced, interesting thinker, as you'd expect from somebody in the Renaissance in Florence during this period, and in the context of what's going on around him, which is a Renaissance, and he is really part of that intellectual milieu. All right, thank you guys, Cassandra. Thank you, John, for getting us a little closer, and Andrew for a $20 question that gets us closer. Andrew says, Rand's letter, quote, many men take their love life passively. They take what comes along. That's wrong for both sexes. I say find what you want and go after it openly. A little less openly as a woman, but go after it. It's always good to find a quote from Ayn Rand that confirms what I told you. So thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that. But yes, I mean, Rand was exactly that, right? Rand was exactly that. So thank you, Andrew, for that quote. All right, Raphael. Thanks, Raphael. Hi, Yaron. How morality can be objective if we all face different choices? How to connect objectivity with different concretes? This is not leads to subjectivism. Yeah, because while we all, face different circumstances, the principles by which we should act should always be the same. That is, morality doesn't give us a concrete by concrete by concrete, circumstance by circumstance by circumstances, recipe for how to respond. It gives you the principles, and in that sense, a recipe. But it doesn't give you the concrete action. It gives you the principles by which to judge the circumstances and therefore determine what you should do. That's what morality is about. Morality is about the principles. And the principles, if they're good principles, if they're thought out right, then, the principles of what morality is. Morality is a code of principles to guide one's life, to be able to tell the difference between right and wrong. In other words, between pro-life values and between anti-life values. Morality is the science of life, the science of pro-life principles, right? So, honesty, right, is just be honest. And there are a million circumstances, but generally be honest, particularly with yourself. Always be honest with yourself. And unless somebody is trying to get a value from you unjustifiably, you should never be dishonest to another person, unless they deserve it. But even the fact that they deserve the lie, right? The Nazi knocking on the door and asking if they're Jews in the house, you should lie to them. They deserve the lie. And they deserve the lie by the standard of morality, by the standard of your own life. So once you understand the principles of morality, then you can be moral, objectively moral, in any circumstances by applying those principles. hopefully that answers Raphael, but there's a lot to say about a topic like that, more than I have time for. We've hit the 3 hours on the dot, so thank you, everybody. If you still want to support the show, you can do a sticker on the way out. Don't forget, if you want to go to Ocon, you get a 10% discount by using the Yaron Brook show code, which is 24YBS10. You get a 10% discount. And don't forget to check out alexepstein.substack.com. I will see you all tomorrow at 2. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.